A guy pushes through the swinging doors and the place goes quiet. In the Old West, those bars were where people met and did business. Sawdust on the floor to catch spills and spit. A long counter. Rules pinned up on the wall. Gambling was instinct, not just poker. The bartender often played referee. Not every place had batwing doors, but they all had tabs and quiet deals. Number 1. To picture a real saloon, forget the shine of the movies. In mining camps and train stops, it was usually the first thing to show up. It often started as a tent or a shack, and once some money came in, it got the false front, a tall wall that hid the simple roof. It wasn't decoration, it was a message. It said the owner planned to stay and that the street had a future, a common trick in the West to make a temporary place look like a real town. Inside, everything followed the logic of use. A long bar, bottles on shelves, and sawdust on the floor to catch spills and spit. The air was thick. Beer, harsh whiskey, tobacco smoke, sweat, and dust that came in every time the doors swung open. The light came from kerosene lamps, just enough to count coins and keep an eye on the cards. Music was rare. What you usually heard were low conversations, short laughs, and the clinking of glasses. If you look at old photos, the interiors show that same simple, functional setup. Nothing fancy. Some prosperous towns like Deadwood and Tombstone had more polished places, but the rule was practicality and the promise of staying put. In Deadwood, there's still a famous bar that keeps sawdust on the floor as a reminder of its roots. The tall front, meanwhile, lined up the buildings and created the illusion of an avenue, even when the back was just a pile of boards. In the end, the saloon played many roles, selling drinks, hosting games, gathering news and deals, and announcing with wood and kerosene that the community planned to last at least until the next sunrise. Number 2. In the Old West, danger came through routine. Baths weren't a daily thing. Water was pulled from the well, heated on the stove, and poured into the tub, bucket by bucket. In many homes, the same water was used by the whole family. Without plumbing, a basin and cloth had to do. In saloons, the floor gathered dust, mud, and trash from streets without sewage. The wind just blew it all back into the air. Mouth care followed the same improvisation. Toothbrushes were rare, and a toothache was a job for the barber or the blacksmith, who pulled the bad tooth out with pliers and whiskey for anesthesia. Professional dentistry would only take hold later in the 19th century, descended from the old barber surgeons. In that kind of environment, diseases spread fast. Cholera traveled through contaminated water and shared mugs. The idea that infection came from water became established with John Snow and the major outbreaks of the 19th century. Tuberculosis thrived in crowded, smoky saloons and the habit of spitting. The response was slow, spittoons and laws that were often ignored. Smallpox stayed active, even though vaccines had existed for a while. There were campaigns, but their reach depended on distance and distrust. In the end, those who feared fights and revolvers ignored the invisible. Tight routines and doubtful water kept the roulette of infections spinning. Number 3. In the Old West, the danger in a saloon wasn't just at the wobbly tables. It was in the glass. Real bourbon hardly ever made it to the frontier. What people drank was rot gut, with nicknames like coffin varnish and tarantula juice. It wasn't just a joke. With little law and big profits in sight, bar owners bought cheap neutral alcohol and fixed it up to look like whiskey. Color with burnt sugar, body with glycerin and fruit, and sometimes some very questionable additives. Many labels swore it was pure bourbon 10 years old, while the stuff inside smelled more like kerosene. The setup made cheating easy. After the Civil War, what we'd recognize today as real bourbon made by serious distillers was rare. Most of the market came from mass-produced neutral spirits, rectified by middlemen who mixed whatever they had to stretch it out and fake barrel flavor without ever using a barrel. It was cheap, profitable, and fooled travelers passing through mining towns and cattle crossings. Not even beer could save the day. Without refrigeration, it was warm and went flat fast. That's why anyone looking for a real kick asked for something stronger. Only in the 1880s, with new artificial cooling technology, did beer start to travel better. Even then, the glass stayed a gamble until rules came along. The Bottled-in Bond Act of 1897 and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 set standards and forced labels to match what was inside. Until then, raising a glass was an act of courage, not for a duel in the street, but for whatever was hiding in the barrel. Number 4. In the real West, trouble didn't have the shine of the movies. Many towns made people leave their guns at the door and take a ticket. The rule kept tempers down and made the sheriff's job easier. So when things did heat up, it was usually shoving, threats, maybe a punch. Shootings happened, but they weren't routine. Fights started over a bad deal of cards, unpaid debts, shorted change, or a plain insult. Inside, gambling set the pace. For decades, the favorite was faro, fast rounds and sharp dealers. Later, poker took over. Worn decks, chips sliding across the table, and dealers who treated their reputation like currency. Where there was money and a newcomer, there was a cheat with marked cards, ready to disappear before the house caught on. Between bets, music, laughter, and small talk kept the night going. The women's role was straightforward. Saloon girls sang, danced, toasted, and kept conversation flowing to keep customers drinking. For many, it was income and a bit of independence on a frontier full of both opportunity and danger. Prostitution happened on the side, with its own codes and little protection, usually near mining zones and away from the main stage. Behind the swinging doors, life followed routine, not legend. The business ran on clear rules, risk calculation, and quick deals. To open today, close without trouble, and open again tomorrow. That was the real West. Less glamour, more survival. Number 5. Not everyone made it past the swinging doors. In the West, the saloon worked as a kind of social machine with clear filters. Who could come in, how they behaved, and even what they could say. In many places, the unwritten rule was to keep life outside. Asking where someone was from sounded intrusive. Family names rarely came up. Holding eye contact too long was an invitation to trouble. And a round carried the weight of a contract. Offering and accepting a drink was a brief pact of peace. Refusing could spark tension. The doors also decided who got in. Native peoples and Chinese immigrants faced exclusions reinforced by both law and custom. The anti-Chinese tide peaked with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, shaping who could walk in and who stayed outside. Black men, who were far more present than the legend admits, making up about a quarter of cattle workers at the time, built their own spaces when the color barrier showed up. William A.G. Brown's Boston Saloon in Virginia City became a symbol. A black-owned bar serving black customers with good food and fine glasses, right in the heart of a mining boom. Peace didn't depend only on guns. Many towns enforced weapon control within city limits, trying to protect business and local reputation. In places like Dodge City, carrying a gun downtown became an offense, a sign that order relied more on civic rules than movie-style duels. Behind the counter, the reality had little glamour. Cheap whiskeys earned the nickname Rot Gut, harsh and sometimes dangerous due to adulteration, a risk that grew later with Prohibition, but was already known decades before. Between sweat, smoke, and rough hygiene, good manners kept the cash flowing and the night running. Without the myth, the saloon was less a stage for heroes and more a stopping point. A place where cowboys, miners, traders, working women, gamblers, sheriffs, and outlaws traded truces, news, credit, and silence. A fragile deal that said a lot about how the frontier tried to turn itself into a society.